I think I've mentioned this to you, I had a very dark spell working in the dark arts of PR before I joined ESPN. And the best bit of advice I ever got on writing press releases was never send out a press release that creates more questions than answers. And this very much did that. And also with everything that we mentioned at the very beginning of the podcast, the timing of it, there was no right of reply from the teams or from anyone like that. It's just created this real air of confusion, but also somehow there's something deeper going on here. And I think that a lot of teams, that's kind of at the bedrock of their statement, is saying we want it to be transparent. I don't think any of them are necessarily coming out and saying we think Ferrari was cheating. I think that the first thing they raise is we don't like the lack of transparency here. We don't like that Ferrari have kind of got this pass to have this quick statement released and then that's that. Because I don't know if other teams would have had the same treatment of them. You mentioned Ferrari having quite a lot of money, the lawyers to pay for it. If this had been Haas, if this had been Alfa Romeo, I'm not sure how the same treatment would have come down.
The other thing you've got to understand with why the other teams are taking this incredibly seriously is that the money they receive from Formula One is related to their championship position. Now, again, we're not saying that the Ferrari was illegal. We're not saying that that its results should be ripped up. But without any transparency on why this agreement is the thing they came to, then there has to be a question asked of like, well, wait a minute, are Ferrari's results are they still valid? Because until we know exactly what this agreement was about, we don't have any clarity on that. Now, no one is saying that. No one is saying that Ferrari should be chucked out the championship at this stage. But we need to know what was in this agreement, why this agreement was reached, and why it's been shrouded with such secrecy. I think part of it, and if you were to look at it from a Ferrari point of view, obviously you have intellectual property. There's a lot of technology in that engine, and perhaps there's elements that aren't allowed to be put out there because one, they haven't been found guilty of anything, so they don't need to kind of expose any of that, and it's intellectual property they've invested in. So why should that all be kind of put out in the open? But I think really what the teams are looking for is not even that. It's more of an explanation. And as you say, the statement that was put out by the FIA didn't offer a satisfactory explanation of what had happened and where they got to and how they come to that conclusion. Yeah,
and I think from talking to members at teams, we've both done that this week, that was the main thing of just sort of, well, what on earth does this mean? Not just for Ferrari, but going forward into the new season. And coming at such a crucial time, everyone's talking about Melbourne and the flyaways for other reasons, but it gives this is going to run through the first three races, which brings me to, I guess, the most important point from this podcast is what does happen next here? What is the process that teams can follow, and what do we think the initial response from, or when do we think the initial response from Ferrari and the FIA will come?
Well, I think we're in pretty unprecedented territory in some regard, because I can't remember an example exactly like this where the teams have demanded a bit more transparency on a specific statement. As far as I know, there is nothing in the FIA's regulations that covers this, I don't think, but the teams very clearly, but the fact that they retain the right to take legal action to get more information. So I guess that is that's almost like the nuclear option. That's where they can go to if they want to. I think they would probably rather some kind of another agreement was reached whereby they got a little bit more information from the FIA on what had happened. But it really is a case of watch the space. But I don't think these questions were going to go away and slip away. And I think probably the response from the rival teams was inevitable. So I should imagine the FIA have thought about this already and possibly have an answer. And who knows? We may end up in a situation where it can all be explained quite easily. But then I suppose the question is, well, why didn't you explain it in the first place? And this is one of the main concerns from the other teams, is that this complete lack of transparency. And from a governing body in the world we currently live in, and with the money that's thrown at Formula One, it's so out of whack with what you would expect from the governing body of a sport.
I think that is the craziest point of this, is that it was just, when we left, I mean, we were puzzled by it. We talked about it on the podcast. And I remember we even said when we were recording that, we can't really talk about it because there were so many questions about it. So you can only imagine what the teams thought when they landed. Some of them would have already been on their flights going back. Pretty unprecedented, as you said, to start the season this way. I suppose the FIA could argue that they didn't want anything public being dragged, F1 being dragged through the mud in public. the teams would argue, well, the fact that we don't know if a team, had overstepped the mark or not is dragging F1 through the mud, and now the fact that they're potentially getting away with something would do that as well. And I guess that's the issue we get to now, is both sides are basically going to argue that they're doing the right thing for Formula One, they're doing the right thing for the sport, when I would agree with the 7 teams. I think that we need to know what that statement was. Otherwise, going forward, how are you going to trust any decisions that are made from that point on?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's the same people in charge at Ferrari, the same people in charge at the FIA. If it's considered an acceptable way to kind of come to the end of investigations, to create private settlements with teams, then I think it creates a very dangerous precedent that probably other teams would expect to be given the favour as well. So, the problem is that it's clear that the FIA didn't have enough evidence within its own structure to. I mean, I would like to think that anyway. I'd like to trust the FIA in that regard, that they didn't have enough information to be able to throw the book at Ferrari initially. So there's more to this than maybe is, maybe some kind of people on Twitter and so on are suggesting. Ferrari are kind of innocent until proven guilty. But I think it's the lack of transparency that is the biggest concern. And as the teams pointed out in the statement, that then brings the integrity of the FIA into question. And if they have an answer for that, great. But if they don't, then it really does affect the way that F1 is managed going forwards.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content plus live streaming, make sure to subscribe to ESPN Player.